Okay, hopefully that's working. Hi everybody, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. Forgot my lights. I'm Maria, and I am here to help you make more quilts in less time with less stress. Obviously, my stress levels are a little high right now, but welcome anyway. Hopefully the microphones are working. I believe that we solved the problem. If you cannot hear me, please pop something into the chat and I'll go back to the lavalier. But anyway, if you are new to this channel, I normally start with the tip of the day that's related to organizing. Either your home, your quilting studio, your projects, something along those lines. Because I am a professional organizer for my day job. But this has been one heck of a week, and so I do not have a tip for you this week. I apologize. But that's normally where we start. Then we talk about quilts that I have going in progress. Over the last 2 weeks, since our last session, I completed 6 of the flowers for the flower garden quilt. Completion includes making the arc and putting the arc on. I have also completed about 20 of just the flowers themselves. So I've done a whole lot more than what you're going to see here, but then these are going to join the rest of the quilt on the other part of the design wall. And then as I do things in the next couple weeks, they'll get put up and you can see where the progress is at that point. So our current quilt for 2024 for the group is a star quilt. The current block of the month is this one right here. If you go to StashBlaster Quilts, well, you can't see the .com, but it's StashBlasterQuilts.com. You can go to the annual tab 2024 and see the current blocks that we have going. This is block 6. There will be 9, and then that means that we have August, September, and October, which gives us November and December to go ahead and get it quilted and bound so that you could, if you chose, have this quilt done for Christmas or just by the end of the year in order to get ready for the next quilt. Each year I do send out a questionnaire. I don't send it out, excuse me. I will post it on my communities tab, both here on YouTube and on my website, so that you can go, and if you want to have some input into next year's quilt, then that's where you'll have your opportunity to do that. You are, of course, always welcome to send me an email, mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com, or you can put a comment here on the chat. I pay attention to all of those, and then that'll help me guide what we're doing next year, because we've done this is the 3rd year in a row, and they've all been very different quilts. The first one was using leftover 4 patches and making them all wonky and doing some weird stuff with them. Last year was a mystery quilt, and this year is the star quilt. So I want to make sure that you guys are getting out of this what you would like to get. If you want something like a mystery quilt, though, it takes time to make one. So that's why that survey will probably be coming out during one of the October meetings that we have here on either the 1st or the 3rd Wednesday of each month. And then that way I'll have enough time, depending on what you choose, to get us ready to start in January. So that's where that all stands. Other quilts that I've got going on. I did a lot of sewing the 4 patches together from the 2s that I had. I had shown you a whole bunch that I did last time. I did a little bit more of that as well. I also got a little bit ahead on our blocks for the rest of the year. I am having a little bit of a struggle with the 9th one. I told you it was going to be a little bit more difficult, and I don't know what happened the day I sewed it together, so I am redoing a little bit of it. But I'm actually a little bit ahead for a hot second, so hopefully that trend will continue, and I won't be doing these just before going on live with you guys. Okay, so I have been asked to do more actual sewing of the blocks of the month that we're doing live, so that's what we're going to do today. We are going to sew this block together, we're going to sew this wedge together step by step, and then I'm going to show you how to assemble the rest of it. And then that way you'll have that as a tutorial if you need it. This is one of the easier quilt blocks that we're going to have. There's one more easy one, that's next month, because we're going to stop doing paper piecing and we're going to go back into straight block assembly like we did at the beginning. So there is an easier one, and then there's two more complicated ones coming up. Okay, so when you go to that Annuals tab, you're going to have a document that's the instructions, and then you're going to have the templates. And those come in two different types. The first one is just your standard, there you go, standard templates. You cut them out, and then you can do English paper piecing, or you can trace it and then sew it on your machine, whichever method you prefer. There is also this page for paper piecing. Now, if you decide to do this one, you're going to cut this triangle out and then tape it over here so that you get this. Oops. I'm trying to get them both in the picture at the same time. So it looks just like that. See, here's where I taped it on. Sorry, no, this side is where I taped it on. You can see the line. Okay? So once you have this, this is 1/4 of the block. It's 4 pieces. This is a very simple block to do. Once you have these, I recommend that you cut them out on the cut line, on the raw edge line, the cut line versus the sewing line, which is the next one in. Then you lay them all out in a square, and you mark what color goes where. Because in this case, this block is in one of the quarters, right? And the other part of this interwoven piece is in a different wedge, in a different triangle. So when you lay these down, if you mark them, then if you drop anything, if you're sewing, you know, assembly line sewing very quickly, you won't lose track of where your two pieces are. So, here, let me switch cameras here. It'll probably be easy to see this way. You can see here, oops, hold on. Here it goes. So I've got X's where the backgrounds are, and then this one says purple, and this says blue. So that when I'm assembling the quilt, all I have to do is grab the piece that's the right size and the right color, and I can just go ahead and pop it on and sew. So I did put this first piece on. It is pinned. I also put a little bit of glue on there because I did this about 2 weeks ago. No, 2 weeks ago. And I knew stuff was going to be shuffled around, and I didn't want any of the pieces to get mangled, so the glue holds it down better. So this is where we're going to start with this block. Now you start by putting your first piece on the wrong side, face up. We're going to put all the rest of them face down, fold, and iron, but this first piece goes face up. Now, this does not have to be trimmed exactly to size. As long as it's oversized, you're fine. Because what you'll do is you'll turn it over, you'll fold on those, oh, I forgot to mention, you're going to want to pre-fold on all your lines. And so I folded it away, and then I folded it towards me, because I want to be able to take this back like this, put my ruler down with the 1/4 inch on the edge of the paper, and then trim up. Okay, and so I do that on all 3 sides. So this way, then this way, then this way. Then this first piece is done. It's ready to go. Okay, and that is piece number 1. Okay, all of these sections are numbered, all the 4 pieces, in terms of assembly. Can you assemble them in a different order? Sure. You could do, you could build out from this corner and do something strange along those lines. This was just the way I thought would make sense to most people. So we have piece 1 here. Piece 2 is going to be a background piece, and it's right next to this one. And what's nice is that this line is continuous. So when I flip it over, let me get my my fabric pieces here. Okay. This piece I'm going to want to finish folded so that this line lines up. So all I have to do is line that up, and even if I'm off slightly here, it doesn't matter. I'm actually going to give myself a little bit of extra. Not a lot, just a little. Okay? And then when I flip this over, I'll be able to sew on this line, back stitching at this intersection. You don't really have to. You could actually sew a little bit past this, but then you're fighting with the paper a little bit more. So I'm going to take a little bit of a back stitch when I get here. All right, now, because we're doing this together, I'm going to keep moving this camera around, so I apologize if anybody gets seasick. But let's do this. That actually went fairly smooth. Okay. So you saw how I lined that all up, right? Alright, actually let me grab my leaders and enders box too. A few pieces out of it anyway. My box is under my table right now, so it's a little bit more of a challenge to get to than it usually is. Okay. So this is just a stack of leaders and enders from my box that I keep under there when I'm not sewing. Because I'm doing this with you, it would normally sit over here next to me, under where the camera is, but I want the camera and iron and everything to be a little bit easier to move around, which is why it's not where it normally would be. Okay. So normally I would have a leader or ender in already. The problem is that my last quilt I was sewing with black, and this particular set of leaders and enders is white, as is what I'm going to be using to sew the block. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in a leader and get it going. Okay, so now when I fold this back, you can see this is where my stitching line is, and I am completely extended beyond it. Let's see if I get a little closer, maybe you can see better. Okay, so I don't have to worry that this has shifted and it's, you know, not going to be caught by my seam. If you wanted to, you could take the pin out, put it back in, and hold the pieces together. As a general rule, I'm not worried about that. It's going to be just fine. Okay, so then I'm going to start sewing. Now I've got my fold line right here that goes all the way to the edge, right? So I know that if I start my stitching there and I stitch right on that fold, I'm going to be good. Okay, so I'm at the line. This is that horizontal line I said. So I've got my reverse button, and now I'm going to just take a couple of stitches backwards just to lock that in. I'm going to lift it, slide, and I will put in another leader and ender. I like to start with the needle down when they're small like this. Okay. Stitching. I do try to pull my pins. I don't always, but I do try to. Alright. Let me grab a pair of scissors here. These are oversized scissors. I really should be using like snips, but these will work just fine. Pull off this leader and ender. I'm just going to toss it over here to my left. I will take them all down later and sew them to get iron them all. Okay, so piece 1 and piece 2. Now all I have to do is fold this back like so. I'm going to finger press it, but I'm going to go ahead and press this with the iron. Okay. So start with it together. do a little bit of a warm up here. Fold it back. And press. Now, if I was concerned over this piece of fabric being lined up properly for the next piece, one option would be to make it oversized. So where it hung off on this side a little bit extra as well, and then all I would have to do is what I'm about to do with the rest of it. Here's my cutting mat. All I would have to do is fold this back and trim it up. I don't need to in this case, but I could. And then here, I normally wait till the end to trim off this piece because I'm going to trim right to this triangle. But if you wanted to, you could trim this right now as well. But this will be part of my final cleanup. So I hope that'll make sense, as well as this little tip here. Okay, so 1 and 2 have been sewn. I am going to cut these threads from the end off a little bit. I like to do it as I go. As far as I'm concerned, it sure beats doing it all at the end, because I always miss one when I do it at the end. Alright, so that's ready. Alright, now flip it back over. So this is piece number 3. Really, at this point, you could do either of these next, whichever one you're comfortable with. But I'm going to do piece 3, because that's the way it's numbered. Okay. And then here is my piece for piece 3. And I don't remember how I laid this out when I made sure it was going to be big enough. Here it is. Okay. Now, when this goes on, my tip might be a little short, but that's okay because you know that the actual block is not going to get sewn except to about here, right? Because it's 1/4 of an inch on each side. So I have extra room at the tip if I mess something up. So, okay. This must be how I had it. Because I did rough cut it to the right shape. Okay. So now I can just put this on here. Now, sometimes I get a little nervous. My sewing line is here at the tip. I know it's hard for you to see. I can just see the line through the paper. But sometimes if I'm nervous, what I will do is take a couple of pins, put them in at the sewing lines. Okay, you can see right there, it came through right where it was supposed to. Sometimes I just want to make sure that when it's sewn and I flip it over, that it's going to be where it's supposed to be. So now I'm just going to pop this one up through here where my nail is. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then when I fold this back on those pins, am I covered? And if you look, nope, this piece is on wrong. So that's one thing that's one reason I like to check. When I'm doing a bunch of these, I use giant pieces, and I never have to worry about it because I'm going to be trimming off a lot, and I'm not going to worry about it. So when I cut this, I probably cut it this way and put it on this way. So now I'm going to pin it again real quick at my 1/4 inch mark. I can see the holes from the first round. So I'm just going to go through the same holes in the fabric. And then when I fold this back, where the pins are, you can see that I'm completely covering the paper. So this is how I cut this piece originally. Now, one of the reasons that this is a problem is because this is just plain white. It's the same on both sides. You'll have the same problem with things like batiks. But if you have normal fabric where it's printed on one side and not on the other, you know, it's a faded version of itself on the other, it's a lot easier to keep track of which way's up. Okay? So all you need to do is put your pattern pieces over over the fabric, rough cut around it, and then you'll know it's going to fit when you move it over. Okay? So, now that I know that this is right, I'm leaving the pins in just for transport back over here to the machine. Let me spin here. Okay, back to the machine. And up a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to leave the pins in. And then when I flip this over, now I'm going to take them out. A lot of times I'm doing a bunch of this downstairs in front of the TV. I do a lot of my trimming down there. So having them stay in place and know that I'm not going to drop pieces is handy. That's why I do it, but you don't have to do it that way. I'm going to sew. Now I'm on that folded line. And now I'm on the stitched line. And at this point, you can go right off the paper. Doesn't matter. Once you're off the paper, you're done. Give a little bit of a drag. Little down. Leaders and enders. If you haven't worked with leaders and enders before, it's a Bonnie Hunter thing. She's the one that started it as a regular thing. My mom was doing it decades ago, but it wasn't something that people knew about. And the idea is that by putting these little pieces through in singles or pairs or whatever, while you're sewing a different quilt, you're making a good head start on a second quilt. So you're kind of sewing two at the same time. In this particular case, these are just little pieces that I had left over from other projects that I am sewing together into 4 patches, and then I'll put all the 4 patches into something, or several somethings. 4 patches are one of those basic units. I do that, and them, and I do half square triangles. I do by the mile. Okay, so back to the ironing board. Took my cutting mat off. Okay. Little warm up. I have to. If you wonder why I move the iron in weird ways, there's a cord for my camera that if I just move my iron over, there's a chance I could touch the camera cord with the iron and melt the camera cord. And so I don't want to do that, and I don't want to have any sort of electrical problems. So, okay, so now I fold this back, give it a quick little finger press. This is not how I would normally do this if I was doing a bunch of them. It's just the camera's in the way. But it's the only way to have it here where you guys can see really well. Okay, so that's piece number 3. And then this will be piece number 4. It's really easy to put on. You're just going to line it up. Now because this is a batik, it's pretty much the same on both sides. I think the colors are slightly better on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and put that here. If you wanted to check it by doing the pins and folding it back, you could. In this particular case, because of the ones I did earlier, I know that this is just going to fit. Now, it is not going beyond the paper. Okay, the paper actually ends here, but it is going past the trim line. So, I mean the sewing line, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay. Oops. Let me move this iron. Let me move the camera. Okay, here we go. Flip it over. And then up. Down. Okay, and now I'm sewing on block 4. Now if this was a more intricate block, as you added each block, you would go ahead and do that trim up like I mentioned before. This is just such a basic block, you don't really need to do that. Because except for this one block in the center, all of the other trim pieces are going to be hanging off the edge and then are going to get trimmed up in finishing the block itself. Alright, that's it. That's piece number 4. Let me get all these instructions out of here. Okay, spin you around again. Get rid of this other leader and under. Warm it up. Fold it. Finger press. Press. Okay. Right, I'm going to give this just a second to cool down. Give it a little bit of help here. Now you can see I've got this big extra wedge here. I could have pre-cut this rectangle, but I did give you approximate measurements on your handouts, and this is the size rectangle I used. If this makes you nervous that it's a little close to the end here, you can always make this block a little bit bigger if you'd be more comfortable with it. It doesn't need to be more than a 1/4 inch bigger, but that's completely up to you. Okay? Alright. So now it's time to trim up. The nice thing is we have our trim line already done because that's the size of our rectangle, or of our triangle. So all you have to do is plop down your ruler and cut. Rotate your mat. In this case I'm off the edge, so I'm going to have to bring it back. Now you can see here, this is longer than your standard 12 inch ruler, even longer than a 12.5. So just start it back here, line it up as best you can. Trim. I like to just leave the blade down, but you can move it if you prefer to reline up and then start again, but trim that all off. Sometimes at the intersection like this, you're going to find you got a bunch of stuff. You can either keep rotary cutting it, or you can do that with scissors. I prefer the scissors just because the rotary, you keep going over and over and over again. And of course, if you hit the paper, you're going to dull the cutter a little bit more. Plus, you're digging into your mat more, so I prefer to just snip it. Okay, and there's our third cut. So there's our block. It's all done, all sized up, all squared up, ready to go and get added to its friends. Okay, so finishing the block. So let me show you these. Okay. Now, these I've already sewn together. I'm going to sew these 2 together, then I'm going to sew all 4 together. But this is the time. Double check. Did you get your pieces going across like they're supposed to? Because what you don't want to do is sew this whole thing together and then be like, oh, crud, I misplaced one. Or I sewed 2 triangles together wrong. So now all I need to do is fold these 2 together and sew them together on the line. Now, if you're at all nervous about the pattern, when I do this for myself, just for insurance policy, I will take a pin, stick it through this intersection, and then through its opposite front here, so that everything's going to line up the way it's supposed to, just for insurance policy. Okay? And I'll do the same thing at this point, just to make sure everything's lining up. Okay? And that came through just fine. Now, I will also peel this back and take a peek over, peel this back, right, just enough, and then I compare it to the piece that's over on the ironing board, just to double check that I didn't pin the wrong sides. Everything is working, so I'm going to straighten this out again. Oh, my pin came out. Okay. Once everything lines up, you can either take this pin out and do this, and do that, or you can do it without pins. Okay, because you squared these up, these should line up perfectly anyway. I just know that some of you like insurance because you're not as comfortable just winging it. So that is a quick and easy way to make sure that you're all nice and squared up. Put it under the presser foot, remove the pin, now you're going to want to make sure when you do this that your stitch is going right through the X that these two seams made. Whenever you're joining things that are nested like that and you want the point to be nice and clean, that's a little shortcut to be able to do it. Okay. And finish, and you can go right off the paper. A new later under. Oops, I had two there. Some of them are little bitty guys. Hold on, here we go. Sorry, I thought you could see better than that. Sorry. Some of my little guys are really itty bitty. For most of you, you won't have anything this small. And that makes you like regular people, not crazy people like me. But I have a plan for these itty bitties. In fact, I have some that are much smaller that I'm going to have a plan to do something with. Okay. Snip. Snip. Now again, normally if I was doing a full quilt with these, or even one full block, I wouldn't do one triangle at a time. I would do all four. So I would put all the piece ones on, then all the piece twos. So I'd have one leader and ender behind each set, not after each seam that I've sewn. So you're seeing me do a lot of leaders and enders here, but normally that wouldn't happen. If I'm doing a full quilt, I might do an entire row worth of piecing, and then, you know, like if I was doing, let's say, a quilt 6 of these blocks across, I would do all 4 number 1s for all 6 blocks at the same time, then all the 2s, and then all the 3s. Which is another reason why you want to make sure you've marked your colors really cleanly. It just makes life so much easier when you do that. Okay? But this is such a quick and easy quilt to put together that it's nice if you don't have to stop and start as much as I'm doing here. Okay, so the next step is going to be to remove the paper. You don't really have to at this point, but I like to remove it from the seam I just sewed so that there's less in my way when I press it open. We're going to press this seam open. I know we normally press it to one side, but just for bulk, even though there's not a tremendous amount in the middle, I do like when I'm putting quarters of blocks or eighths of blocks together to go ahead and press them open. So they'll just press better without the paper in the way, because I'm not folding the paper back on itself as well. It's still going to stay on this side, but it's no longer here where the fabric is. And I'll do that on both sides. come on, hold on. Okay. Now the block I did for the stars in the yellow and blue is a little bit less contrast than this block usually suggests. There's a lot more contrast in the block that we're doing today, but it is not uncommon for maybe to have like red and yellow and blue and green as your colors. So I've got kind of a cool palette here because I've got the green is kind of bright, but it's still one of the cooler colors. The green, the purple, the blue, and then my black has a lot of the blue and purple in it. So I'm still keeping the whole thing fairly cool, but you certainly don't have to. This is a great quilt for getting out some of your bright and wild colors. Just make sure that they don't blend together too much in the same block. Okay? Alright, let me move this over here. Let me swing this over first. Then switch the cameras so that there's less seasickness. Okay, so in this particular case, I'm just going to finger press the seam. I did get a question in the mail, email, not that long ago, where somebody was asking me about finger pressing, because I just run my nail along the seam, and she said, but I don't have any nails. And that's perfectly fine. You can do it just with your thumb, you know, on the back side. I've dragged my thumb like this in the past. Hopefully you can see that, yeah. But they also do make little presser type iron things out of wood. You can use a credit card. Anything that's going to just put that additional pressure on that seam to help it lie flat first means that when you go to iron it, it'll be cleaner. Okay? So this is the half we just finished. This is the other half. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing that I just did. I'm flopping this over. In this case, I'll double check my center with a pin and both points, and then I'll be able to move forward from there. Okay? So let me do that so you can see it. Oops, that one still has a leader under on it. Okay, so I'm just going to go through here. Should come out on the other point. It's off slightly, so this is a great time to adjust. Okay, and my centers. Okay, now in this case I'm just going to use the paper to show me my line. And it should be right on the seam here, right at the paper line, which it's not. Things have shifted. So now I can go ahead and grab that. Okay. Now at this point, since I've locked in these 2 points, I'm going to go ahead and put pins in. I'm going to put one. Hold on. This seam allowance flopped under. I want it on. Actually, no, it's fine on the bottom side. It'll be easier to take the paper out later. It's not really that hard either way, but I can go ahead and do that. And then that one's in, so I'll put this one in. Oops. Okay. And then this one. Okay. We're off slightly, so I adjust. Now, given how this is set up, as long as this center is good, the exact positioning of those points isn't as important. But I know a lot of you get nervous, so feel free to go ahead and pin those into their right place. Let's come back to the machine. Get rid of these papers. And now we'll sew the last seam. Okay, I did not get all the way to the pin. Oops, I got snagged on this pin down here. Let me get it off my shirt. Okay, taking out the pin. Oops, I just knocked all my instructions off the back side of the desk. That's okay. Alright, one more quick leader under. Let's pop this in. Pull the pin. And stitch away. Okay. Let me trim this block off of the leader. And trim this one off. And now for the moment of truth. I open this up. How good's my center? Looks pretty good. So at this point, you have a choice to make. On this one, I removed all of the paper. If you wanted to make a bunch of these and sew them to each other, then you're going to want to leave the pieces with these outer edges on them in place, just to make it easier later to assemble them together. At least I do. Your call. But that doesn't mean the ones in the middle can't come out, which means as the quilt gets assembled, you won't have 800 different pieces that you have to pull the paper off of. Most people complain that that's the one thing about English paper piecing that they don't like. It's the dealing with the paper afterward. Okay? So in this particular case, oops. Alright, I melted my tape a little bit. Okay. Didn't done. One thing that I forgot to mention, when you tape this on, you have to be careful because you will melt the tape later and it could get on your iron, because that's what I did on this one. If you tape it on the back side, the fabric will be covering it, so it will keep it from rolling or pulling, which is what happened here. Basically, as I was sewing and manipulating things, the tape rolled over, which isn't very fun. But anyway, so when this whole project is done, then all you have to do is remove the papers. So let's go to that. In this case, there's only 4 blocks, so they come out pretty easy. Any little bits like this you can go back and get later after you've pulled off the major pieces. A pair of tweezers, just regular old bathroom tweezers work just fine. But since we folded the paper both ways, the sewing acts like perforation as well. It's very easy to take the paper off. Now, if you've got a piece like this that is more difficult than others, oops, hold on, sorry, like this one that's a little bit more difficult than others, then one thing that you can do is just take a pin, this is just a regular old pin, run down the thread line, like this, and like this. You can also use a mechanical pencil without the lead in it, and then you can basically just take your needle and use it to pull the paper up, get your finger under, and pop it off. Now, because this was glued down, it's a little bit more difficult in this case than if it was just sewn. But even then, you saw that that wasn't hard to take off. I just showed it to you in case you decided to do a project that had smaller interior pieces. And of course, some people actually leave all the papers on till the end. If you look at historic quilts, people who used newsprint, they often left the newsprint in, because if you were making the quilt not just for its appearance but for warmth, the newspaper added extra insulation, so they never took it out at all. So that paper just stayed in place for 100 years. So if somebody asks you, you weren't being lazy, you were being historic. So anyway, let me see here. Let me see notes here. Yes, you can also do some stay stitching around the outer edges. If you want to remove the paper earlier, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. In this particular case, you could just stay stitch where the pieces are joined. So you could do a little stay stitching here. You wouldn't have to do the whole row, but you certainly could. Doing your outer corners would also be nice, but that's a personal preference whether you like it or not. I generally don't worry about it, but then I don't usually have pieces sitting around for very long, and I'm not manipulating them a whole lot. So it's completely up to you. A lot of people like to do that, and that's a great suggestion, Judy. I appreciate it. It's just something to think about. And that is the nice thing, is that if you had stay stitched, then you could remove all of the paper as you finished each block. In fact, if you trimmed up each triangle, and if you wanted to do that one line that's the outer edge, you could stay stitch that before you even joined the 4 triangles together. I know some people who do that. Your call. Okay, so at this point I'm just taking out the papers. Easy peasy. This is probably the easiest block for, one of the easiest blocks you can possibly do for foundation paper piecing. However, if you go with the templates, this would also be an incredibly easy one to English paper piece if you wanted to do that. Since there's so few seams, it would be very easy to go ahead and whip this one out as a small project to get started. Because there's not too many seams, and you don't get lost in which piece goes where as much as you would if they were little tiny pieces and you were doing a big thing. So that's half of them. Now I'm going to do the other half. So I don't know about where you are. I know some of you are not in the Northern Virginia area. I don't know what's been going on lately. It's been 100 degrees raw temperature. I think it started on Sunday, but definitely Monday, Tuesday, and today. And then when I came downstairs at 2:30 this morning, it was still over 80 degrees outside. And that is not normal for Virginia. So tomorrow I'm actually working on a job site. I don't do that much anymore, but we wound up with a problem, so I'm going to be going. And I find myself thrilled that the high is only going to be in the 80s, which for me is like, oh, I'm dying. But it's 20 degrees less dying than I would have had otherwise. But we've been getting the thunderstorms and everything, and it's huge, and then there's nothing. So when I was driving home today from a meeting I had, a lunch meeting, there was nothing while we were in lunch, and then when I came out, it was just starting to sprinkle in Reston. And then it was a total downpour on my way home. It was basically whiteout conditions with rain instead of snow. And then about 2 miles down the road, it was starting to clear up. And by the time I got home, almost all the rain was done. So it was very, very localized, very, very intense storms. If you're watching this at a later date, by the way, it is July. It's not, you know, our dog days of August kind of time of year. So I am going to be very glad when things moderate a little bit. I had planned on doing some work in my garage once Scott was feeling better, but it was too cold at first, and so I'm like, okay, well, when he's feeling better and it's like beginning of July, which is usually 80s, I can put up some fans. It'll be shaded, of course, because it's in the garage. If I do it early in the morning, it'll be fine, and I'll work on it. But it went from cold and rainy to OMG, it's hot out. So I didn't get anything done in my garage. I'm gonna have to this fall for sure. But I'm hoping that maybe this weekend it'll only be in the 70s when I go out into the garage, which is still pretty warm for doing a lot of lifting and carrying. But if I only spend like an hour or so, maybe 2 each day, then I'll at least make some progress. Because right now I'm not making any progress out there. I'm doing some stuff inside instead, so I'm not being a total schlub. But I will be very glad when things moderate a touch. I've been invited on Saturday to a picnic, and I just keep looking at it going, yeah, but how hot is it going to be? Okay, so I have taken all the paper off. I could have just removed that strip and then pressed it to get the center nice and flat. But it's okay that I did it with the paper off. Either way works. So I'm going to go ahead, open this up, finger press it. Now this is of course a longer seam. You're going to want to make sure that you're not twisting your seams and pulling things all off kilter, or your block won't be square. So just be gentle with it. If you pressed it before you took the paper off, it would be more stable. I just prefer to press without paper whenever possible. I'm not a huge fan of paper piecing. I certainly do it. It has its moments to shine. But I don't do it a whole lot, and so I don't like to press that much with the paper on. But it does work as a stabilizing agent. That's the whole reason why we stitch to the paper instead of just stitching the pieces. And it will keep it more stable for the ironing as well. Okay, so I am just now pressing. Sorry, didn't realize I hadn't changed cameras. Here we go. Swinging you around. And opening it up. So this is the seam we just sewed. Let me get my junk out of the way. Alright, this did not press over well. When I moved the iron, it folded over, so let me just get this end. Oh, come on. I don't know why it doesn't want to be over. Okay, that's better. And now I'm going to flip the whole thing over. Make sure all my seams are flat. You can feel just through the block. And then I'm going to give it one more good press. Please remember this is a press, not an iron. Iron would mean I was scrubbing it back and forth. It looks like I'm just gliding across, but I'm not. I'm setting the iron down. Then I'm picking it up just very slightly, moving it back, and then setting it down. I'm not just running it flat across the block, because that's going to add to distortion. Okay, just going to hit these little points real quick. Make sure everything's all nice and flat. And here we go. Block number 6, done in a different color style. So whatever you like with this, I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this is a pretty simple block. Even doing it here, stopping and starting, talking, etc. Especially if you had removed the paper, you could easily do this block in an hour the first time. This is not an intense block. So please give it a try. I hope you enjoy it. There's 8 million names for this if you go to look it up other places. I did use EQ8 to design this quilt, so I've been giving you the EQ8 names for the blocks in case you have it. They're the same names in 7 and 6, and I think in 5. They call it Interwoven Star. I've seen a couple of magazine articles that have it called Galaxy Star. There's a bunch of different ones for this. But overall, it's a very, very simple paper-pieced or English paper-pieced block. So our next block, like I said, is going to be sewing squares and rectangles and strips together. So we are leaving the land of paper piecing behind, and we're going to do the last three blocks just straight out regular sew on the line kind of thing. If this is your first time here and you've stuck it out, congratulations. Sometimes there's a lot more chatter, sometimes there's more or less sewing depending on what we're doing. But I did have a request to do more sewing on the channel to help people who want to kind of do it as a sew along. I am looking into being able to do a regular, just everybody sit and sew kind of thing, and then you can ask questions for your project or whatever, maybe this project, whenever it's convenient, kind of a thing. So that's where we stand with that. I will be seeing everybody the first Wednesday of the month. That's when we meet here, first and third. So sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 3 weeks, but it's always the first and third Wednesday of the month. If you want to email with any questions, either leave them in the chat or email me at mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com. Again, the pattern is at StashBlasterQuilts.com, the annual tab, and then 2024. 2023 is in there, so if you're interested in the mystery quilt, you can still go back in time and get that pattern, so it's completely free. So I hope you will enjoy it. I do like to respect your time, so I try to end within just a few minutes of 8 o'clock, and I try not to go over. So the only other thing I'm going to talk about here is all of these little guys. I'm going to take these downstairs. Because of how I sewed them, I'm going to be able to spin my center seams. We've talked about that before. So those will all be spun and pressed, and they're going to get put into my 4-patch drawer. And then later on, I will be able to trim them to the final sizes that I need for the project I'm thinking of, or ones later in the future. And I'll already be a step ahead versus if I was sitting here going, oh, now I have to go and cut all of these little squares and make strip sets and then cut them and subcut them, etc. By doing it this way, I also have a huge variety of fabric in the quilt because these come from all different projects. It makes it a little bit easier to do that whole assemble a variety without having to sew 8 million sets together and then make the 4 patches. They're already done. And so I'm a long ways away along the way of completing my quilt. People ask me how long a quilt takes to do, and if you're starting at the beginning, these first stages seem to take forever, right? You have to sew your strips together, you make the 4 patches, and then you make those 4 patches into bigger patches, etc. So any of the little bits you can get done early. The later stages are bigger pieces, so they go together faster. So it's easier to complete a quilt in a short period of time when you already have a bunch of the work done. So it is almost 8 o'clock. Goodbye, everybody. I will hopefully see you the first of the month when I will reveal the next block in our quilt. Have a great time. Take care, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye. Oh, it's not ending here. Hold on. Bye.